Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Khalid Cannon to talk about his nonprofit, Put Me In. Khalid, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So, for people who are hearing you for the very first time, could you explain a bit about how you started getting involved in the nonprofit community?
Yeah, for me, the way I was always raised with a mindset of giving back. Growing up in Alabama, like in the Bible Belt, church was always first and foremost. And so my church community kind of fostered that sense of supporting each other, building community. And I always felt supported by that community. And so I wanted to always pay that forward. And so I think the very first instance of having a leadership role in the nonprofit world was when I went off to college and I had the opportunity to be a philanthropy chair for my fraternity and going to school at Yale in New Haven. New Haven's a city that has a lot of needs. And for us to be able to give back and support the city that supports us as a university was something that was really, really special to me. And just it was just like a natural transition where it feels good to help others. And I think everyone should have that opportunity and that mindset.
There's something about, I forget the exact quote, but the idea is that if you want to feel best or good, like people think that receiving gifts is not the highest, but at least a very strong emotional reaction versus they've actually done tests and it's the reverse. It's by giving, you actually get a greater sense of pleasure than receiving.
Absolutely. I believe I had a mentor, my very first manager ever, my first job out of college. His name's Tyler Godoff, and he was a big gift giver. And it was just one of those things that stuck with me from that role where we worked on a lot of cool projects together. But one of the things that I always took away from that is being able to think about an interaction and being able to follow up with that person with a very thoughtful and special gift to them that lets you know that person left an impression on you. And that's kind of bled into my everyday life where I love Christmas now in terms of giving gifts to others and trying to be very thoughtful and give them something that makes them think like, he's really paying attention to that one small thing I said in passing. And it's just like a really small skill set that I think is really valuable.
I think it's actually a super thoughtful gesture because we all know how other people influenced us, right? We have a conversation with someone, we meet somebody in the street, we walk away, we know exactly how that person made us feel, but we don't usually know how we made them feel. So for them to be able to share that back with us is a fantastic, positive, emotional feedback loop that I wish more people would do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you had this, I know, because I know a bit more about your background as well. I know you had a bit of a turbulent background, let's call it, shifting into a more positive one. And then there was this need, I think probably at the beginning, this innate need to say, you know what, I need to give back because I was helped along the way. Maybe you could explain a bit about that backstory.
Yeah, so my superhero origin story was I grew up on a chicken farm in Alabama, and it was a small one bedroom farmhouse where, much like Clark Kent, I was in the middle of nowhere with fields and chickens and not a lot of people. But for me, it was just me, my mom, and my sister. My dad was arrested when I was about 4 or 5 years old and was kind of in and out of my life at that point. And for a lot of people, that's kind of a huge scarlet letter. There's a lot of stigma that comes along with that. But for me, I always felt very lucky because I had a community that wrapped their arms around me and made sure that I felt loved and taken care of, and that I wasn't the consequences of my father's decisions. So for me, having aunts and uncles, cousins, extended family, and then a church community and a broader community of youth sports, they all stepped up to make sure that I was following the right path and that they motivated me to compete on the field athletically, but also in the classroom academically. And they made me feel that I was able to be just like every other kid. And that propelled me on my journey where I was able to go out and try to be the best football player, basketball player, baseball player I could be, but also the best student. And that whole culmination of that experience led me to have the opportunity to play football at Yale, which in and of itself is life changing, going into the Ivy League and all the prestige that comes along with that. But thinking back almost 10 years now after my Yale graduation, thinking back to like my moments at Yale and what made me successful there. And then since graduating, I can still go back to some of those lessons I learned on the youth sports courts and fields and think about some of those coaches that molded my life. And they went above and beyond to make sure that I felt loved and I felt cared about. And I think those moments are absolutely formidable.
It's an amazing, amazing story. And then, so taking all of that, everything that all the experience that you had, all the ups and downs, you decided to package it together in some way and create this organization called Put Me In. So maybe you could explain a bit about what the organization is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Put Me In kind of takes the ethos of what I experienced as a child, and we're spreading that to kids across the world. So for me, having those caregivers and mentors growing up through sports, that created that community where it truly does take a village in today's society to raise a kid, and not every mother or father who's doing it on their own has that village. And so through Put Me In, we're trying to recreate that effect by paying for their sports. The idea started with Matt Blodgett and Robin Glazer, and then I was volunteer number one or two that was introduced to them when I heard what they were building, and I realized like I was that kid. And so looking at me as a success story, I was able to get hands-on and involved with how they're trying to deploy that program. And what we're doing programmatically is we're giving kids $1,000 a year that goes towards financial aid, league fees, registration fees, and then just general travel to make sure that they can get to and from practice or to and from their travel tournaments to make sure they can stay involved. And so we started in the summer of 2020, and during that time period, there was a lot of community calls and understanding what our need was, making sure we weren't duplicating any efforts. The real thing that we wanted to do with our program was amplify all the other organizations that are out there. There's thousands of great leagues and coaches across the country, but there's just this barrier of access financially for some of the children that are coming from parentally incarcerated situations. So we're trying to remove that barrier and just give them access to what's already existing. So starting in 2020, we really figured out where we were in our landscape. And then in 2021, we enrolled our first cohort of 10 kids in the Bay Area. And through that, we realized that, yes, this has a huge impact. Like the feedback we were getting from those 10 families was incredible. Softball players were hearing, or we were hearing from some of the softball players in our program that this girl was one of the most talented players on the team, but she didn't make the team that year because she wasn't confident at tryouts because her bat had dents in it and her softball pants had holes, and she just didn't feel like she belonged on the field with every other kid out there. The next year, like through the Put Me In program, she had new softball pants and the same bat as every other player on the team, and she felt confident like that, like she belonged. And she went out and had a great season. And it was just that sense of empowerment and self-esteem that comes with looking and feeling like everyone else at times. So we started with those 10 kids, and then we've since spread across the country where we're now supporting families in 15 states and about 150 kids in the program. So we did that through thinking about what are the simple things and those fundamental building blocks of our program, and then using technology to scale. So with the original cohort of 10 kids, we started with emails, phone calls, text messages from caregivers. And with just 10 kids alone, it was a huge ordeal where at the time, Matt Blodgett was running it all. And it took about 20 hours a week for him to manage the program. And we realized like that's not scalable. 10 kids, 20 hours a week, that's a pretty crazy caseload. So through our investment in tech, we were able to scale. And last year, when I had 100 kids in the program, it took me about 45 minutes a week to manage. So we had a huge spike in efficiency by spending some time thinking about our program and then developing a mobile app that allows us to deploy our funding to all the families across the country.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack here. Now, God, I get the sense of your excitement is awesome. Let's roll back a little bit though. So let's even start with the name. How did you come up with the name Put Me In? Where did that come from? Because to me, my personal experience, actually, the first time I would say, or the most recent experience I had with this word or a sentence was actually on a dating site back in the day, where I had written my profile, of course, and the first thing that this girl contacted me with was the words "Put me in, coach." And I just thought that was a super clever way of communicating that the person is in, they're involved, they think they're suitable for the role. It's a play on terms, obviously a playful sport, but it's a playful sentence. It shows cleverness and all that kind of stuff. So to me, that was like when I saw your organization has Put Me In, I had that positive association to that experience. So that's my kind of pretty brief anecdotal moment. But I'm curious to know how you came up with, or how the name came up with, who came up with the name Put Me In. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think your approach, that's pretty spot on, where I believe our founders were listening to center field, where it's put me in, coach, I'm ready to play. And when you think back to what I mentioned earlier about there's all these leagues across the country and all these kids that are ready to get involved, like they're just sitting there saying like, put me in, I'm ready. And what we're trying to do is just give them everything where there's no barrier that's stopping them from getting in the game. So we're just giving them opportunity because they're ready to play and we're ready to make that happen.
And then you're focusing exclusively, as far as I know, with kids whose parents are incarcerated in some way. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, there's currently about 5 million children across the country who have a parent in prison or jail. And oftentimes they're thought of as the hidden victims of incarceration, where it's really easy to see that, hey, person A committed a crime and then they're being punished for it. But it's oftentimes forgotten about that there's the other family that's involved with it, where you see the victim and the victim is obviously deserving of their respect, but you forget about the other surrounding people that are involved in that situation, and oftentimes those families are forgotten about. There's all these extra expenses that come with incarceration, such as phone calls, visiting. You're often not incarcerated in an area that's very convenient for your family to come visit. So we have families in our program that travel 3 hours both ways to go visit their incarcerated father. And so there's all these extra expenses that come on. And then when you think about that, I believe two in three families that face parental incarceration are living in poverty. And when living in poverty, one of the first things that's going to be cut from your budget is going to be your extracurriculars. And we also know how important those extracurriculars are for that fundamental development of a child. And so we want to do everything we can for this forgotten population to give them an opportunity to be just like everybody else.
Yeah, I've heard the stories about alcoholism, for example. Not only does it completely destroy the life of the person who becomes the alcoholic, but it has this ripple effect across families and friends where they others get impacted as well. So it's interesting to see there's a similar impact to incarcerated people as well. And there is maybe even a more of a negative stigma for incarceration because alcohol, everyone, not everyone, but a lot more people drink alcohol than they are incarcerated. So I think there's an even a more negative stigma around the incarceration. So that's already a really bad starting point, especially from an impressionable kid's perspective.
Absolutely. And I think like the key word you're using there is stigma. And that's something we're really trying to break down where like the kids that we serve, like they're not the product of their situation. They don't have to follow in the footsteps of the parent. Like it's one bad decision by the parent does not reflect on what decisions their children are going to make. And by giving them the opportunity to be surrounded by communities and going back to that village metaphor, having that support system that's going to give them the tools to be successful later on in life, we're giving them that opportunity to overcome that stigma that's being placed upon them.
So these kids, I assume also they're boys and girls, right? There's no gender preference. Any particular age range that you focus on or have limits to before they can qualify?
Yeah, so we enroll kids as young as first grade and we stay with them until high school. Like the real power of our program, I believe, is that compound effect of staying with kids long term. We typically stop enrolling around the 10th grade just so we can have that long term impact. But seeing the kids grow year over year and seeing the consistency of our program is, I think, the real superpower of what we're doing. Where we had last year, we had our first two high school graduates that came to us when they were in ninth grade. And now they're both in college. One's playing college softball. This year we had a college football player or a high school football player commit to college, and now he's going to be playing quarterback at a junior college this coming fall. And so we're super proud of that year over year effect where we're seeing the impact of our small $1,000 investment grow over time, and the returns on that are immense. And then it has even a more powerful effect on some of the younger kids that we work with. There's a kid in the Bay Area who, when he joined the program, he was in the third grade, but he was reading at a pre-K level. And when you think about what does reading at a pre-K level mean, like that just means you're not reading. And through the power of sports, he had the routine of going to karate every single week. And his sensei impressed upon him that he's got to be able to read these rules as he walks in the door. And he's got to do his homework. And he has to have X, Y, and Z taken care of before he gets there. He started really focusing in on all these other extra things in his life, making sure he got his homework done, eating healthy at home. He jumped 4 reading levels. By the end of his third grade year, he was reading at a fourth grade level. And his mom credits all of that to his sports participation and the routine that places out on it. And he put the video games down and he focused on himself and getting healthy and competing. And that carried over to the self-esteem for him to be able to compete in the classroom.
Just for the international listeners, first grade to high school, what age groups are we talking about? Age limits?
About 5 or 6 to 18.
Okay. Yeah, and the sport aspect. I mean, a whole conversation could be had around just the positive impacts of just playing sports, whether it's karate with the discipline and the structure and the mindset to team sports where you're in a community, you have to participate collectively to achieve a particular goal. I mean, just that in itself is such a tremendous impact, especially when you got great teachers or great coaches that can positively impact you. And to have this kind of sweeping impact, positive impact is must be beautiful to watch.
No, it's incredible. We try to run Put Me In like a for-profit business where we're very focused on metrics and what our key measurables are. And one of our most important metrics is tears on the job. I've got a meeting every week with one of the founders where we're talking about and recapping what happened this week. And typically, out of 3 out of 4 weeks in a month, we're crying on that call together, where it's just so powerful thinking about the impact that we're making and sharing some of these crazy success stories of the growth and the kids that we're serving. And so that's one of the things that we're most proud of.
I think that is the definitely for me the greatest metric I've ever heard. Tears on the job. That is fantastic KPI.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you started off, I love the approach of going with a very small, I don't want to call it sample size, but a small, almost proof of concept, 10 kids in 2021. Just get them on their feet, get the whole program and thing. And it makes sense that at the beginning you do a lot of manual work. And I mean, 20 hours a week is a lot of work for people to do to manage 10 kids. But it makes total sense to start from there because you haven't figured out what works, what doesn't work. You're still tweaking the system. You're getting that feedback loop. So I just want to make sure it was clear to people that starting off from a very manual, very intense, heavy type of workload is a very common and a normal starting point. And then as you're going along, you notice where you can make things more efficient so that you can start scaling. So I was curious if what was the moment where you said, this is like too much manual. We need to, like, how do we even approach the problem of moving to scale?
Yeah, so we naturally have a very lucky approach to our program where we're all coming from a for-profit background. Before Put Me In, I was working as a consultant where I worked with large tech companies and cascaded strategy across an organization. And then my next consulting role, I was working for PE firms doing pre-transaction diligence and thinking about how do you grow small tech companies. And so that's the lens that I came in to Put Me In with. And then when you think about our founder, Matt Blodgett, who invests in tech companies, he's thinking about like, where is the value? Like, where can we be differentiated as a nonprofit? And so we always thought that we wanted to have software around our program in some capacity. But like you mentioned, we did want to start very slow and have these small experiments and think about what it is that we actually do. And if you can't do it on the back of a notebook, then or you definitely can't do it in a mobile app. So our whole growth process has been a series of very small controlled experiments where year one was, is there a need here? Like, does doing this simply in an analog fashion, does it actually make an impact? And the answer right away was yes. Year two was developing our technology and then thinking, can we use that technology to scale? And so we went from San Francisco to Boston and we became bi-coastal. And using that was another great success for us. We were able to manage kids across the country. And then I became the first full-time employee and be able to do that. It was a super easy, streamlined process. Year three was all about how can we find our kids at scale. We might touch on this later, but the way that we typically find the kids in our program is we partner with other small nonprofits. So for instance, in the Bay Area, we partner with an organization like Project Avery or Friends of the Children. And these are organizations that they do a lot of day-to-day work and mentorship with the children that we serve. And so we're able to go to them and say, hey, we've got X amount of spots for you all this year. Can you fill them? And oftentimes it's really great. They can fill them right away when it's 5 to 10 spots. But when we want to go from 200 kids in our program to 2,000 kids in our program, like that model's not necessarily going to work. So our year three experiment was all around how can we find kids at scale? And so that year I started going into prisons and telling my story of growing up with an incarcerated father and how sports changed my life and put me on this trajectory. And then some of the amazing success stories of our program already. And then through that, we were able to get kids all across the country. Because when you think about some of these large institutions, they don't have people that are just incarcerated in their backyard. Like we went into a prison in Kansas and there were people there from Georgia, from Missouri, Chicago, Montana. So you've got people that are incarcerated all over the country. And from that trip alone, we spread out and we're starting to help kids in about 10 states after that one visit. So that was the big experiment for that year. And then last year's big experiment was, can we really rev up our revenue engine? And so we hired our second full-time employee to join me on the team to lead fundraising and really treat this like the business that it deserves to be and having a go-to-market strategy that's building out upon it.
Awesome. I'm going to say awesome a lot, but it is. If I understand correctly, the fee you offer about $1,000 a year for fees, travel, and it's all related to sports, right? How does it work? Is it the students who are applying for it and then they receive the money? Are they to provide receipts, or is it before or after? Like, how does that whole logistic part work in terms of the transfer of money?
Absolutely. So through our mobile app, I'm able to receive requests. And so I log in every morning, check our request queue, and validate the requests that are coming in. And through that, caregivers are able to have full access to what we're, caregivers are able to have full decision-making process in what they're getting their kids involved in. So to start with, we've got a pretty broad range of sports that we support. So we've got your typical American sports of football, basketball, baseball, but we also have a lot of combat sports. And that was one of those first things that like it was like an uncommon thing that I wasn't thinking about. But when you take a step back and realize that a lot of the kids we're working with are coming from very difficult situations. They've got a lot of anger. So it's natural that they want to get into boxing and karate and have a really good outlet to take that aggression out. And so that was one of the first areas that we started to naturally expand to. And then we got a lot of requests from young girls that wanted to get into dance and cheerleading and tumbling and ballet. And so enabling them to take advantage of those efforts were an immediate no-brainer as well. And then we've even branched out to some very unconventional sports as well. One of my favorite requests ever was for a kid in the Bay Area to compete in not professional, but a very competitive Rubik's Cube competition. And the video of him and his fingers flying and winning that competition in California was so impressive. It blew me away. And we're like, absolutely, we can definitely cover that. So the very first thing is the caregivers have full range of selecting what sports their kids are getting involved with. And I think that's really important to allow the kids to explore and find themselves and find what works for them. The next piece is there's a decision in our request app around direct payment or reimbursement. So we do have quite a few caregivers in our program that are unbanked. I believe 75% of our families are living in household incomes of $50,000 or less. And in some of those situations, they don't have a bank account. And so for them, walking up and buying a $50 pair of shoes can be really difficult. And so in those situations, what they'll do is they'll copy and paste a link to a URL for Amazon or Dick's Sporting Goods, and they'll drop that directly into the mobile app. And I'm able to click that link from my admin portal, purchase cleats, and ship them directly to their address that we have on file. And so in those situations, money never comes out of their account. In the other case, we've got a lot of caregivers that are just crazy on top of things, and they go out and they try on 7 different pairs of shoes, and they find the best bargain and best fit and what the best color scheme for their kids' uniform. And then they'll purchase that on the spot, and they'll take a picture of that receipt, upload it into the mobile app, and I'm able to go on, validate, verify, and then reimburse them, usually within about 24 to 72 hours. And so what we're doing is, one, we're giving the caregivers the empowerment to go out and buy whatever they would on their own. And then two, we've got full transparency in where every single dollar in the program is going, where we're not just writing them a carte blanche $1,000 check. Every dollar in our program is being validated and where it's being spent and how it's being directed into sports.
So everything right at this point sounds like it revolves around the mobile app. Maybe you can talk a bit about that because I mean that also allowed you to scale and go global, not global. Maybe one day, hopefully one day you'll go global, but at least national and reduce also the amount of work you're doing. So let's talk a bit about not getting too many technical details. Like just explain how the app came about and how it's an integral part of your organization.
Absolutely. I believe the mobile app is pretty foundational to who we are as an organization. And we started off by doing the hard work of running the whole program on spreadsheets and notebooks and just like writing down the whole process. And that was able to let us start thinking about the user flows of how do the families in our program interact with us, and then therefore interact with the app in the future. And through that process, we're able to be very thoughtful and take an approach of building out what the user flow would look like and then simplifying it as much as possible. And if you go to our tech page on our website, putmein.org, you can see that we've got some language around every feature that goes in the mobile app has to survive a cage battle, where we don't want to just add features for the sake of adding features. We want this to be extremely simple and user friendly so that the caregivers that we serve are incredibly busy and they never have to wonder like, is this going to work, or like how do I do this, or like it's a super streamlined process. And one of the I think the important things about that is when you think about who we're serving, like the caregivers in our program are incredibly busy, and oftentimes they're not just tech natives. We've got a lot of grandmothers and grandfathers that are uh, housing the kids that we're working with. And so mobile apps might not be the most simple thing for them. So we want to try to keep it as easy as possible to use. And making sure everything's streamlined and simple has been a key to our success to this point. And then so we've got the caregiver facing front, and we've also got a SaaS-esque background for me on the back end, and I'm able to do a one-click overview of every kid in our program. So it's really easy for me to have a full history of exactly what a kid's been up to. So when I do a check-in call and randomly call a mom on a Friday afternoon to see how things are going, I can look back and say, hey, like last week she asked for football cleats and then also basketball, a new basketball. And I can say, like, kind of tie those in together and kind of see what's going on in their family's life. And then that gives me a quick snapshot of exactly what's going on. So as we continue to scale, and right now we're at 100 kids or 150 kids, and I've met pretty much all of them. But once we get to 1,000, it's going to be very difficult for me to know exactly every kid's story. But being able to look at some of their transaction history is going to be able to tell that story to me and allow that conversation to flow very naturally.
So it's the kids themselves have an app, the caregiver has an app, and you have the back end part of it, right?
So the kids don't typically interface
Okay.
with that. We do
Okay.
see some of our older kids using the app. We've got a few high school age students that um, they're a little bit more tech savvy, and like they love the independence. They get on and they make their own requests. And there's every now and then I'll have to text the mom directly and ask, like, "Are you sure that they want this?" And just kind of validate a few things. But for the most part, we do empower the kids to use that if they're comfortable there.
Okay. And you built the house, that app, I guess you hired a firm to build it, and or you don't build it in house. You mentioned you guys are quite tech. I was curious to know, if you were motivated enough to do it yourself, or is it better to outsource these kinds of things?
Yeah, so we did a lot of the user journeys in-house. Thinking about that, we did work with a couple of advisors who donated their time pro bono to help us think through these things and lead some of those conversations. But we know our program better than anybody else, so it's up to us to kind of build that out. But for the actual coding and development part, we did outsource that piece. There's an amazing team in the Ukraine that we partnered with there called C Prime, and they do a lot of that work for us. And so we kind of work with them on retainer to do some of those minor updates and fixes. But the actual like IP was all directly created by us, thinking about what are our processes and how do we make this more streamlined and simple.
Do most of the initiations begin with a request, or is it like I'm just curious about the high level features? Like there's a request waiting, I want a pair of shoes, or I want to participate in a particular program. Are there other flows? Like what are the high level journey flows that you have?
Yeah, so we kept it super simple. So it's basically only 4 pages. You've got the homepage where one of the most common things that we would get asked is how much money is remaining in my account. So the homepage has a snapshot of exactly how much is in your account at any given moment. It's got your starting balance and your current balance, and then a short history of your most recent requests. Then there's a big button that says request funding, and we hit that, and then that's the simple funding, the simple form to fill out, which usually takes 30 seconds. And so you've got that. Then the last piece that we have is the text messaging feature. So a lot of the caregivers that we work with, they change their phone number pretty frequently, and so some of the other partner orgs that we would work with would lose track of the families that they were supporting and we were supporting. And by us embedding messaging directly within the app, we've had almost zero attrition in our program because we're always able to access them. Where if they change their phone number but they still keep the same phone, they've got the app embedded, and we're able to message them directly on that and be able to stay in touch. So that was a huge addition for us there. But those are like the three key pages, and then you've got of course a settings page where you can update and tweak a few other small things. But those 4 pages are our entire program in a nutshell.
And because I'm a geek, I like to ask you these questions. But from the financial perspective, let's say if they got two questions. $1,000 a year. What happens if they don't use up the entire amount? Does it roll over? Does it lose it or use it? And what happens? Part two of the question is, what happens if there's a request that takes them just a bit over the 1,000? Do you normally have a approval process, or is it really a hard limit?
Yeah, it's absolutely. That's a great question. So we don't believe in use it or lose it. So we've got some caregivers that or kind of stepped back and thought about the whole life cycle of what their kids' youth sports career is going to be. And they've only used like a small portion of that as they're in the youth sports. And they realize that they want to save some more of that for when sports get a little bit more expensive in high school. And so they're kind of stacking that. There's one caregiver that's I think's got at this point 2,200 in their account, and then they've kind of been saving and rolling over each year. Um, and then in terms of the hard cap, we do hard cap it at 1,000, but there are opportunities for excellence grants for kids to go and earn additional funding above and beyond. There's a few kids that have joined travel teams, and those have been $3,000 a year, which is crazy to think about how expensive youth sports has gotten. But those are some of those opportunities that it's just really hard to say no to. And so we've worked with them to figure out how we can find additional funding and sponsorships to cover some of that extra burden that they have to compete.
Let's talk about sponsorships and basically your income revenue. Obviously, I'm hoping, I imagine, that people can donate to your organization that will help. But in terms of other partnerships or sponsors, how do you find them, keep them, and expand them?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we're still in the early stage of a nonprofit. We're about 5 years old right now. And so we're still kind of really tapping into the friends and family network and some of those individual foundations and being able to connect with what our ideal donor profile is, which is former college athletes that are now executives and they've seen directly the power of sports themselves, or it's individuals that are or individuals that are of means that see how expensive youth sports have been for their families and are looking to pay that forward for other kids that can't quite have that same leg up. And so we've really narrowed in on our ideal donor profile, and that's helped us target our messaging towards them. And then our next phase is thinking about what are some of those corporate sponsorships look like. We've had an amazing partnership with Dick's Sporting Goods right now, where they're able to fund 25 kids in our program. And I think that's one of the beauties of what we do is we're giving kids $1,000 a year. So it's really easy math to think about, all right, I'm going to fund X amount of kids in your program by writing an X amount check. So through a $25,000 check, you're able to fund 25 kids. And so that's kind of streamlined some of those conversations for us really easily, and thinking about how we can partner with some larger organizations that can potentially support and help us grow our impact.
And then on the kids side, you mentioned earlier that at the beginning you used to go to schools, go to prisons, do these kinds of meetings in meetings in person. And as you're scaling, do you have a plan for how to be able to reach out to people? Like, is it advertisements? Is it Google Ads kind of thing? Like, how would you, if you could reach 1 million kids, how would you foresee yourself being able to do that?
So right now, one of the big things that we want to try to balance is getting our name out there to get in front of donors, but also not getting our name out there too much where we have this huge inbound funnel of kids that we want to serve. The families we work with, they've been dealing with disappointment and letdowns like their entire life, and we don't want to be another letdown and bottleneck for them. So we try to filter out not getting our name out there too much to the families directly right now. And then as we grow and we have more capacity to support them, I believe going to those prisons directly is going to be one of those amazing sources for us. Right now, when we go into a prison, we try to have a very selected population that comes and listens to us. So that way it's a controlled outgoing message. And then we get the information for the children and their caregivers, and we go about and then follow up with them directly. But I think there's definitely a point in the future where we can just be a flyer on every prison in America, where if you've got a kid and you're walking by, you're like, all right, I want my kid to see that. And then we've got access to that whole incarcerated population that we can be supporting.
Definitely have a chicken and the egg situation, right? Where you don't have too many kids in your queue because that would, like you said, express disappointment. Because you have to get the revenue, then the revenue might be hard because you don't have any kids. So I guess there must be a balanced threshold where that if you can get this sponsor, you can get these more kids. Like how do you manage that queue, that seesaw?
It's definitely the difficult thing that we've been wrestling with in our strategic board meetings right now, where we believe that we need a wait list to go and fundraise against, but we also don't want to have a wait list because like there's ethical questions around that. So figuring out what the right time on a waiting list could be, and then figuring out what the velocity and getting them off of that wait list is one of those big experiments that we're working on this year. And so I've been to a few prisons already this year in 2025 to start building out the small wait list that's very controlled, knowing that hopefully we can get them off by the end of the year and keeping it very, very controlled. But it is definitely one of those things that if there's anything keeping me up at night, it's like, what is that right balance?
You guys obviously love the trial and error approach and experimenting thing. It takes a bit of guts to do that, but I think it's totally the right way because, in a certain sense, you're, well, at least from my perspective, breaking new ground, right? So you don't have. It's not like you can look at another organization and copy and paste. You have to kind of explore and see what works and what doesn't work. I'm curious to know if there's any lessons that you've learned that you could share with the audience, maybe that isn't so specific to your case, but can be used by somebody else who's in a similar situation as yourselves.
Yeah, I think one of the mottos that's really helped us to this point has been that ASAP is poison. Like ASAP is poison. There's no need to rush anything, where we always try to take a step back, hit that figurative simple button. Like, how can we simplify something? Like, if there's something that's giving you a headache, like, it shouldn't give you a headache. Like, what we're doing is we're giving kids access to something that's one of the most fun things in the world, and that's just like the power of play. And if there's anything in our process that's not fun, that's not easy, that is a huge roadblock and barrier for us, how can we simplify that and make it easier? And so making sure that we're not trying to rush just to put a band-aid on something. How can we take a step back and slow down to really figure out a long-term solution, I think has been kind of one of our superpowers.
Awesome. Given all the success you've had so far, given your direction of where you want to go, I'm curious to know if you know what you would like to achieve in the next couple of years. Is it just a matter of balancing that seesaw, getting more sponsors? Like, is it growth, exposure? What would be your main concerns, or what are your main concerns and areas of focus in the next couple of years?
Yes. So for our next few years, we've kind of had, like, as we mentioned earlier, we've done very controlled experiments where last year was all about going very broad. And we're now serving kids in 15 states across the country. This year, we want a little bit deeper penetration in some core markets. And we believe that more strategic funding will come with deeper impact in local communities. So this year, we're focusing on supporting families in Chicago, Boston, Austin, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and San Francisco. And we think by adding kids in those focused areas and then really focusing on growing that impact over time, one thing that's going to happen is we're going to start developing community, like having caregivers come together and understand that they're not alone through this process, and having kids connect and saying, we're not the only kid dealing with this in the moment. I think that's going to build really powerful bonds. That's going to tell our stories and build evangelists and spokespeople for us down the line. And two, it's going to be able to help us get strategic funding that can grow those communities year over year and create a flywheel effect for us. So that's our next really big experiment. And then thinking 3 to 5 years from now, it's how do we build out that city model and stay focused where we can add new deep chapters, and then do that in a very efficient process. Does that look like having local advisory boards? Does it look like partnering with a big local corporation and saying, hey, underwrite the first 100 kids in our program, and we can come to your city and we can go into a local prison, find 100 kids, and then have them all enrolled within a month, because our process can be that quick. So figuring out what is that city expansion plan and how does that work is probably our next really big experiment that I'm focused on right now.
I'm just curious, any interests or appetite or thought about having kids being able to message each other directly, or you prefer having more of a guided, filtered approach? I don't know the right word for it.
Yeah, so we've gone back and forth on adding a fifth element to the app around community building. One of the things that we don't want to do is get into like the cold start problem of having a whole new social network,
Mm.
uh, and investing a ton of resources and building out the Facebook for children of incarcerated parents, when Facebook already exists. So one thing that we might trial in the next year or two is building out just a Facebook group for some of our families and allowing them to get on it and collaborate and just chat and talk through some of their issues. One thing that we do, like not super regularly, but when it makes sense, is we have field day events. So in San Francisco a few years ago, we brought a bunch of kids out to Stanford and gave them a core of a college campus, and then had just allowed them to go out and play and be kids. And the kids had a great day. They had a ton of fun. But the real power of that event were looking over at a table and seeing a group of 6 or 7 moms just chatting and talking about all that they're dealing with. Like, oh, how did you find a discount for this league? Or my son doesn't really want to visit his father in prison anymore. Like, how did you overcome that? And then hearing them trade their little tips and tricks and bond was super powerful. Where I think there's just this We talked about stigma earlier, but with that stigma comes this perseverance and resilience, and allowing them to collaborate and understand that together as a community is really powerful. And so, if we can build those communities in our core markets and then create some of those connections, I think we've got a really winning, successful formula.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also another layer is just how technology is able to connect all of us, right? We talk about people who don't even have a bank account or potential to have a bank account, and yet they have access to a phone, access to the mobile app, which gives them the sense of community and connection. So I'm another check mark for technology of helping us come closer together.
Absolutely.
So how can people get involved then? I'm hoping people get inspired, either want to, participate in some way, donate. If you could share all the links that people can use to get in touch with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, our website is putmein.org. You can reach out and check us out there. And please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram. LinkedIn's probably where we do most of our marketing and storytelling, but we've also got a pretty active Substack page. But in terms of some of the thinking about your audience, in terms of some of the other EDs that are out there listening to us, we're always looking for additional partners that can connect us to families that we can continue to support. I think Put Me In is in the software world, we're one of the most we're one of the most efficient value-added services. Thinking about us as a way to amplify your program and get your kids involved and really reinforce what your program's doing through us, I think is a great way for us to connect. And then also thinking about if there's any funders out there listening, we've got a really simple model and we think we're really efficient in how we're deploying our impact. So thank you so much for the time, Alex. We're really excited to get our stories out there. We've got some amazing kids that we're super proud of, and we want to keep talking about them.
Khalid, this is awesome. Thank you so much for doing what you do, and thank you so much for joining me today to share that.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.